In this series of interviews about containing the uncertainty at the heart of adaptive work, you'll hear from my colleagues about what happens when we come face to face with what we don't know, about leveraging purpose as an anchor and using your authority well in moments of anxiety and uncertainty, noticing the ways that negative emotions get amplified across systems and activated in you, and what it takes to truly build an environment for creativity, adaptation, and innovation to emerge. One way I know that sometimes people will talk about adaptive leadership is by beginning with acknowledging the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And for you, at least in your latest book, you're talking a bit about the concept of the edge. Can you talk about the edge and how you use that concept both for yourself and as a way of helping people to use this framework more fully?
So the edge is a metaphorical way to explain the experience we have when we come to the end of what we know, when we come face to face with the unknown, which happens almost, if you think about it, it happens every day in our lives. We just pretend that we know. we pretend we have the answers, because otherwise we would not survive. We wouldn't be able to manage our workplaces. We wouldn't be able to manage, situations in our families. But this illusion that we know is I think at the heart of being a human being. So the edge for me signifies the solid ground on which we've traveled. If you imagine yourself being on this path and you come to a point where you cannot go any further, the sea is beyond the edge. The cliffs tumbling down, and then there's nothing. There's no, you can't keep going any further. And normally when you get there, there are no maps, no one to show you the way. So there's nothing that points to how you should proceed. And that experience, I think, is again core to being a human being. And it's been a fascination for me in trying to understand what happens to us at the edge, and also how can I help in my work, how can I help others manage themselves at that point in their lives. And that point is not fixed. For me, the edge is not a static place. Once you've got there, what do you do next? But there are multiple edges that we go through in our lives whenever we have big questions that don't have ready-made answers, whenever we're grappling with something that is unclear, what the best way forward is. I think the first part of that is the awareness that we're at the edge, because I think many of us are not actually fully aware that we have got to this, we get into a state, we get into a mood, we may feel lost, or we may feel disoriented, we may feel hopeless or anxious. So those feelings may be giving us clues that we are actually being faced with something that requires a different way of proceeding, not the usual way of fixing, solving, putting structures in place, goals, planning. So that awareness, I think, for me is really important. That precedes any holding that we can do for ourselves and for others. So, and I also think that awareness comes from this idea of a watchful attention. That if we train ourselves to be paying attention to what is happening around us, then we can be better prepared to catch those moments when we need to do something else, something different than the normal reactions. So watch for the patterns of control, because that's what most of us go for. That jumping into quick action or strong action, that pattern of control, that desire for control is very, very strong at the edge. I think that minimal intervention or minimal way of interacting with others or acting is possibly more beneficial in that fluidity and complexity and uncertainty than like a strong big gesture or thrashing around in panic. I think that containment works at a point where we can actually notice our tendency to react, to seek the answer, to jump in with a quick fix. And then the idea that actually if we can hold ourselves a bit longer in that space of uncertainty, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, then actually the next steps forward will emerge from that. So I think depending on your role in an organization, whether, you know, if you're managing a team or if you have a role of authority in your community or in your family, I think authority has a really important role to play in providing that containment. And for me, I think it is opening up the space for conversation to occur. I think the tendency for authority in these situations where there's heightened anxiety is to actually control. As I said, we were talking about control and putting structures in place, but actually by allowing it to surface, it's counterintuitive, but actually allowing for people to share how they are going. There is this element of shared understanding of what we're actually going through that then leads to people feeling like they know what they need to do next.
And, you know, the idea that I need to have the answers, or I need to do this alone, or I can't reveal that I'm struggling, all of that becomes an impediment to growth and accessing the wisdom that we're immersed in if we're willing to open up to it.
That's the holding environment. People feel like people are looking out for me, they're taking care of me, they're holding me accountable, because that's part of the holding environment. Is it's not just anything goes, but how do I have the focus, the attention, and the direction that I need to do my job well, and not feel like if something goes wrong, I'm a dead person. Because under that kind of duress, forget curiosity, increased stress, decreased creativity, zippity-doo-dah on innovation. And so all the things that we say we want from people, we have a hard time thinking about, well, how do I create the conditions to maximize those, other than just say to people, well, Jill, you should be more curious.
How do people build their capacity to weather uncertainty? What do you think are the, you know, because you and I, we're both in the business of trying to help people stand up in the face of challenges that are wrought with uncertainty, wrought with loss.
I would say, Jill, one of the fundamental principles I've learned about this, and it's been, you know, it's now becoming clear through neuroscience as, you know, the study of the brain becomes more and more possible with technology. That fundamental mantra, you know, that for neuroscience, that energy flows where attention goes. So to me, the key, I think a fundamental challenge of leadership is, where is the energy in any individual or the system? If the energy is on, you know, the trauma or the fear or the emotion of being lost, all the energy, you know, all the chemical in the body, the electrical circuits of the body are all lined up in those emotions. So to me, one of the things I've learned is how that the exercise of leadership is very much about connecting people to purpose. To have all your emotions, you know, that your emotions are, you need to accept them and allow them, and not to try and suppress them or deny them, but to allow them, but not to have those be the guide to action. But can we get our attention on what's purposeful, what's meaningful, what is it I want my life to, you know, contribute to? And so in these times, for example, in times of tremendous chaos and uncertainty, when people are anxious, they're all the energy, the intention of the body is in the anxiety. It's the life energy is flowing to try and manage this emotion one way or the other. So how do we acknowledge that, you know, and hold those emotions, but get our attention onto, okay, what is going on? What is the challenge that we're facing right now? And what can we do about it? So to me, it's the more that people can connect to purpose, then that's where life's energy will start to flow.
A lot of the negative feelings that are out there aren't necessarily ours. Parts of us will be activated by the negative feelings. So if you're naturally suspicious, or if you're naturally fearful, you may have feel an amplified version of that because you have a valency for it. But to remind ourselves that it's not all ours, it's good because it allows you space to be able to hold it for other people. Does that make sense?
Yes. I also think what makes sense and how we're able to create, to your point, creating a container for others is to understand what our own defaults are. So you said, if I've got a valence for being suspicious, I need to know that.
Yeah.
And almost contain that so that I can hold others in that. So it seems like in addition to taking care of ourselves is knowing ourselves.
Yeah. And also knowing what the systemic kind of emotions that are coming through with what's happening now. So if you have an insidious, deadly disease that asks of people to be more strict about cleaning and you suffer from OCD, then you need to know that that's going to activate you in a certain way. Or if I don't say suspicious just as an example. There are people that, are fearful of other people, or we live in the Middle East, suspicion is, we have that anyway in our system. So like it's not just to know what triggers you, it's also to know kind of what's going on out there and what could those particles of what's going on be kind of sneak in and catch you off kilter,
When you were talking and you said this bit about, I guess it's cliche, I experienced it as self-protection. I experienced it as, I don't want to appear too soft, or I know that this could be taken as, and look, isn't it telling how dangerous it is to appear too soft or to appear cliched around something as powerful as how do we connect with other people? And yet I think that part of what you're talking about is the tightrope that people with authority walk relative to the work of emotionality, of helping people to feel and to connect to feeling, not getting swept away with that, but to actually use that as a way of staying anchored, staying connected to what matters. And that's the only time we do adaptive work, is because there's something that matters. How do you think we tolerate living in the breach, living in uncertainty, when I would argue most of us have been schooled to seek certainty? We've been incentivized to know. How do we tolerate life when things are uncertain, when there's a lack of clarity and disequilibrium?
Again, I think it's different if you're in a position of authority than if you're not in a position of authority. If you're in a position of authority, your job is to be very, very present and empathetic, and to create a space for people to express their anxieties and uncertainties without being disempowered by those fears. So that is the job of people. And it's very hard if you're in a position of authority and you are anxious about the uncertainty, not to try to fill that space with clarity when there is no clarity. But you can model that behavior for people. You could say, I don't know the answer. I don't know what it's going to look like in 4 months, but I know what we can do now to maximize the chances that it will look good in 4 months. Here's what we can do today. So that's from a position of authority. From a position of, if you're not in a position of authority, I think a lot of it is about relationships, about sustaining each other. How do you tolerate your own anxieties, your own feelings of fear about uncertainty, about not knowing what the future is going to look like? I think one of the ways you can address that is with relationships, with constantly staying in touch with people, connecting with people, sharing your concerns, listening to their concerns. That's one idea. A second idea is by trying to see this period of uncertainty as an opportunity. Each of us has, I won't call them fantasies, but each of us has dreams. Dreams is a better word. And it's an interesting time because there's so much uncertainty and so much openness. Try to activate some dream that's been sitting on a shelf. Maybe it's a way of mobilizing people around you to support some cause that you believed in. Maybe it's around changing the rules of the way your community works, however you define that, in a way that you've always wanted to do but never seen an opening before. So to me, those are two ways in which you can address your own anxieties about uncertainty in a manner that will help you live with that and not feel disempowered by that.
Yeah, you know what feels most powerful to me right now is that despite this disruption, the adaptations, the speed and the innovation at which adaptation is occurring is absolutely awe-inspiring.
Yes, and I think
collective. It's everywhere. It's not only those with authority. It's happening in every home, in every organization, in every community, every business, and it's remarkable. All those things that we said were off the table are suddenly on. And there's this appetite for experimentation that it seems as though we were always going to get to. And now here we are, and folks are getting to it.
The way to deal with that uncertainty is, you're right, is by running some experiments, filling it up with some experiments. Let's try this, let's try that, let's try this, let's try that. And I think that's a way of both taking advantage of the uncertainty, but also addressing your own tolerance for it. You know, you're not sitting back wallowing in it, but you're trying to see it as an opportunity. As several people have said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste.
Yeah. As you reflect on what it takes to contain the uncertainty at the heart of adaptive work, a few questions might be useful to reflect on. Thinking back to Deanna's opening, you might ask yourself, when do you know that you're in a place beyond maps, a place that requires a different response from you? And what are your own patterns of control that might keep you blind to realizing when you're in that place? You might also reflect on Max's comments. How does your own belief that you need to have all the answers serve as a barrier to your growth and to the growth of your organization? You might think back as well to some of the questions Jeff raises. What would have to shift for curiosity, creativity, and innovation to be more fully realized in your organization? And I might encourage you to think about Hugh's comments. If energy flows where attention goes, where is your energy going? How purposeful is your flow of energy? I think too back to Sarah's comments. And I wonder what feelings out there get easily activated in you? And how do you remind yourself that all those negative emotions out there, they aren't all yours? And finally, I think about what Marty calls us to. What behaviors do you model for your own people when you're facing uncertainty? What dream is sitting on a shelf in your life? And what experiments might you engage in right now to give that dream of yours a little more of the air that it deserves?